So, former ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule, as you heard in the headlines, expelled from the governing party. Now, Magashule had been asked to step aside. That was back in May 2021 when corruption allegations were levelled against him. He's still to go to trial around that issue. He was then subjected to a disciplinary hearing where he was found guilty of contravening several rules of the ANC constitution. This actually relates to a letter that he wrote where he attempted to suspend the president of the ANC. He was found guilty and given 7 days to explain why he shouldn't be expelled from the party. But he apparently failed to respond. All right, so let's dive into this in a little more detail. Former ANC Secretary General found guilty of, and I'm going to loosely quote from the ANC Constitution here, 25.17.3, failing to comply with any ANC policy in terms of the Constitution or breaching the provisions of the Constitution, and 25.17.12, which is undermining the respect for or impeding the function of any structure of the committee of the ANC. That's quite wordy, but really it relates to a letter that he wrote trying to suspend the ANC president and then refusing to apologize when told to do so. And this all, of course, happening while he was suspended over the criminal charges he's facing over that Free State asbestos tender. And of course, that tender occurred when he was Premier of the Free State. Well, I'm joined now by Justice Malala. He's a political analyst, also author of the newly released The Plot to Save South Africa. And he joins us from New York. Justice, always lovely to chat to you, and thanks so much for being available. You know, one would be forgiven for thinking that he was axed over the corruption charges. But of course, this actually relates to that letter where he tried to suspend Cyril Ramaphosa. Is it fair to say you can get chucked out of the ANC quicker for insulting the president than you can for corruption charges? Or am I comparing apples and oranges here?
No. Sally, you're absolutely correct. Anyone who visits the Free State, if you're in the Free State and you get off the highway and go just off the highway, you'll be met by some of the worst service delivery you've ever seen. You'll be met by potholes and so forth. So the Ace Magashule tenure as Premier of that province was one of the worst you've seen in post-apartheid South Africa. But the ANC never did anything about that. It's when Ace Magashule touched President Cyril Ramaphosa, essentially saying, "I'm going to suspend you for suspending me," that he got kicked out very, very quickly. It's I think your point is absolutely correct, Sally. Ace Magashule was notorious in the Free State for the way he targeted political opponents, for the allegations of corruption, for the fact that the 2012 Free State Conference was found by a High Court to have been not run properly and correctly, but he didn't get followed up for any of that. It's this particular breach that he essentially undermined the president of the ANC and the structures of the ANC that he was gotten rid of. For him, this was a total and huge blunder because it put him out of the engine room of the ANC. So if the RET faction of the ANC wants to be crossed with anyone, actually, this is the man to be crossed with, because by being suspended out of the Secretary Generalship of the ANC, Jesse Duarte became the person in charge of the party organization, preparations for the conference in December last year. And when she passed on, it became Paul Mashatile, who then became the engine of the ANC. And in my view, if you run that office, you have a huge say over who gets to win to be president of the party and in the top 7 and possibly even in the entire National Executive Committee.
What do you think Ace Magashule is going to do now? Is he fairly powerless without the ANC behind him, or do you expect him to perhaps join the EFF or another political party? I think he's always been quite adamant that he wouldn't do that, but of course, you know, things can change.
There are two things here. His motives may not be to rejoin the ANC, but the key thing, if you look at many members of the so-called RET faction who have been kicked out, pushed out, the idea is to continue to destabilize Cyril Ramaphosa's presidency of the party, and in that vein, it's already been said that he is considering challenging this in a court of law, that he wants the entire proceedings to be restarted right from the beginning, that he believes that the summons was not served on him correctly. The ANC has claimed that it served the summons on him, and it has evidence that it was served on him correctly. So I suspect that he might just continue fighting for the sake of fighting and giving the ANC a lot of trouble. On the other hand, Karl Niehaus has said that he's approached President Zuma, approached Lindiwe Sisulu and others to join his new RET movement, which will, as we speak, looks like it will challenge for seats in parliament in next year's election. It may be that he goes there, but I suspect that he'll continue fighting merely to destabilize the ANC and take its eye off the ball as we go towards 2024.
Reverend Frank Chikane was appointed as head of the Integrity Committee of the ANC a few months ago. Last week he gave his first public comments. That committee passes, as my understanding, it passes its recommendations onto the disciplinary committee within the ANC, and then they ultimately make the decision. Do you see the appointment of Reverend Frank Chikane, who, let's face it, is just, in terms of an ethical man, someone who's just revered what he sacrificed, and, you know, let's face it, he nearly died in the fight against apartheid. Do you think that his appointment and his perhaps influence is going to gain momentum for this renewal process that the ANC has been talking about for the longest time?
I think that the first thing is that people like Ace Magashule, the people who rose up during the Jacob Zuma years, are in trouble in the ANC. My view is that even if he challenges this, Ace Magashule is history. It's over for him. He's irrelevant in the ANC. He will continue to be irrelevant. The ethos that has risen up, particularly towards the end of last year in the new year, is one where there's, if you will, some of the leading lights of the UDF, for example, from the 1980s have come to the fore. Frank Chikane is one of those. So Ace Magashule may kick and scream as he's being kicked out of office now, but it is unlikely that he'll find himself welcomed back with open arms, particularly in an administration, in an integrity commission led by Reverend Frank Chikane. Remember that Frank Chikane was the Director General in Thabo Mbeki's office between 1999 and 2008, when Thabo Mbeki consistently refused to allow or to appoint Ace Magashule to the premiership of the Free State. This goes back a long way, and quite frankly, I don't think Frank Chikane would advise anyone to appoint Ace Magashule to any office, particularly after Ace Magashule made it clear that he wants Cyril Ramaphosa out of office.
I want to ask you a couple of questions about leadership. Next year's election, I want to ask you, how important are the personalities going to be? Are people going to vote for personalities and the people they see heading up parties, or are they going to look at delivery issues, grassroots issues? I mean, we have focused extensively on the cholera outbreak in your hometown of Hammanskraal. I know you've spoken to Dan Moyane about that. We're also seeing similar problems in the Free State, near Parys, which of course is Ace Magashule's hometown. Do you think South African voters are just going to look at the bottom line of delivery and ignore parties and personalities and just look at their realities? What do you sense coming in for the 2024 elections?
I think delivery is going to be a big issue. In the Free State, you know, when Magashule came to power in 1999, the Free State ANC got 81% of the vote. It's gone down to about 69, I think, at the last election. But I think the age of the big man, so of the personality, is receding. I think that there is a bigger concentration on delivery. That said, I look at what Cyril Ramaphosa is doing now as leader of the ANC. I think that he's trying to rebuild his image. For people like me who look at international affairs and so forth, we may condemn him and so forth. But if he can fix, for example, the electricity issue quite quickly, if he can deal with some of the issues around water and particularly around cholera, I think he's still got a well of goodwill around him, and he might just, even with his tattered image of someone who takes ages to make a decision, who's not quite as decisive as he claimed he would be. It may still be that he is quite a figure. So in personality terms, he's still quite a big figure, but many others are not.
Yeah, and that leads me to my second question about leadership. We know that tomorrow the president is jetting off to sort of the Ukraine-Russia area along with other African leaders. They're going to try and attempt some sort of peace between Ukraine and Russia. And, you know, it's easy to dismiss it, but at the same time, let's not forget that Cyril Ramaphosa headed up the ANC at Kodesa. He headed up those talks. He was integral to those talks, and that was pretty miraculous, what was achieved in South Africa. It's also something, actually, as you talk about it, that could improve his reputation if there's some sort of dramatic breakthrough. How do you rate the chances of this delegation from Africa trying to intercede in what looks like a very tricky conflict?
I'm afraid on this conflict, I think President Ramaphosa in particular, I think a few of the other leaders on the continent, I think they've been hoodwinked by Russia. I think that, Cyril Ramaphosa has rushed off to stand by Vladimir Putin. He is not seen by Ukraine, he's not seen by many international players as an honest player in this matter. He might try, but every time President Ramaphosa picks up the telephone, it's to Putin first, and then as an afterthought to the president of Ukraine. Just look at the experience of the Ukraine ambassador to South Africa, who begged and begged and begged for months for an audience with the president, with the international relations minister, and kept on being fobbed off. And yet, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, the Russian ambassador are welcomed with open arms. Quite frankly, South Africa is not seen as an honest player, as a mediator at all. South Africa, despite us saying that we are non-aligned, we've shown our hand, and our hand is that we are with Russia, which invaded Ukraine last February.
Thank you so much for chatting to us, Justice Malala from New York. Of course, he's a political analyst, also author of his new release, The Plot to Save South Africa. Let's move now to our